for this symposium, I was trying to draw out some of the, I suppose, themes that were more universal within the legacy and the power of WAAG, and trying to figure out what would be interesting. So one of the things, obviously, is the kind of power of collective action. Not necessarily just collectives, but that falls under collective action. But there's all different types of ways of working collectively in small groups, large groups, with other groups, etc. That is part of contemporary practice as well as historical practice, and is has a huge impact, and sometimes an impact that's not very much discussed, or hasn't been anyway in some cases. So I've asked 3 wonderful panellists to join us and discuss this topic, and so we've got Catherine Marshall, art historian curator, artist Deirdre Manny, and artist Steve Henry. So we're going to discuss this. They all have their own very specific, for those of you who know them in other practice, very specific, I suppose, interests and experiences and connections with this idea of collective action and collectives. So I'm going to let them expand that conversation through their own practices, and that will hopefully give us something more to kind of chew on over the next little while, and hopefully then we'll have a very quick Q&A before we break for lunch.
Thank you very much, Alina, and thank you those of you who spoke this morning, Louise and Pauline and Sarah. That was just really a great session, I think. Okay, so we thought we'd introduce ourselves and then talk about collectives. Very briefly, I'm Catherine Marshall. I suppose, what's my connection with collectives? I think I was born into a collective, because collectives, I think, are always oppositional. They come out of the need to oppose something, and so they are activists by definition. And so I was born into a family where my father died when I was 5, and my mother, with 6 children under 12, from 2 to 12, and a really sort of badly placed farm in rural Kilkenny, she tried to provide for her children. So what did she do? She turned to her mother and her 2 unmarried sisters, and I was raised by that collective of women. So I just wanted to say that, because that's actually what happens all the time. And later on, I remember meeting somebody who posed the question to me. He was writing a doctoral thesis on cooperation, and he said he thought that women were better at cooperation because women are always at the bottom of the pile, and they're always working with each other to get over whatever the obstacle is, whereas men aren't quite. Now, this is, of course, it's culture rather than. I'm not talking about DNA here, but that men have an easier run, so they don't need to be as cooperative or as collaborative or as collective. I'm just throwing that out. Okay, so then I went to work at Trinity, and I'm very glad that the ladies this morning mentioned the International Women's Conference, because I was an academic in a history of art department that finished art history at 1900, and that was a bit of a challenge, but I was involved in setting up the visual arts programme within the Centre for Gender and Women's Studies in Trinity, and helping with that first big international conference that some of you referred to earlier. And then I went to work at IAWA, and I'm not going to talk about that because we haven't got all day, and then I joined this cooperative called Nacailaka in retirement, and that is this bunch of people that you see here. I won't even go through them all by name, but maybe we look at the next slide if you don't mind, Colin. This is a project that Nacailaka did last year, where we took a painting by Raphael, very famous painting, the School of Athens, which is all about the history of education from ancient times, from ancient Greece, I should say, even earlier than Rome, right through to the Renaissance. And then when Raphael had done his job on it, it became entrenched for another 500 years. And so when I was teaching, or all of you were teaching, we were teaching institutions dominated by the thinking in the School of Athens. So the Kailaka came together and thought, let's do something just a little bit wicked with this. So we recreated it. a year ago in Trinity College, in the bastion of third level education in Ireland, the oldest university, almost the same age as Raphael's fresco, in fact. Only we peopled it entirely with women, and with women, living women, who were all high achievers in their fields. And we're claiming that for ourselves as well, actually, because Macaulay are in there too. But we did have the first woman president of Ireland, the first woman provost of Trinity, the first woman president of the Royal Irish Academy, the first woman to set up a women's publishing house in Ireland, and so on. They're not all firsts, because we would have run out of things, I think, but we had, and some of the first women were dead anyway, and we wanted, this is about living people. We considered cutouts, but we didn't substitute.
And you mentioned Jane Gillespie, the first woman who went to court and won her case.
Oh, I thought about her for years, Breda. We didn't mention her here though, because these are Irish women now. This is us taking on that canon that was laid down, and we had great crack on the day. And then when we were finished posing for her photograph, we all adjourned for lunch, and we recorded all the conversations at lunch. So we haven't done anything with those yet, but we have them. And it was just so great to have all those women. I mean, there's a sportswoman there, there's a farmer there, there's scientists falling down the steps practically, and there's a next president. Yeah, I said that, Pauline, or Patricia, sorry. We have a 19-year-old climate change activist, Ireland's rep on the United Nations Climate Change Forum, meeting Mary Robinson the following week and saying, "Oh sure, I'll see you at the UN anyway." That kind of thing. So that was that project. And then I suppose I wanted to say that is so much a collective project, but it became more than our collective. It became, just like Pauline and Breda, it became more than our little group of 8 women in Macaulay. It became all the women who came along. Mary Robinson standing while we draped an old curtain over her, because that's what the costumes were, with a safety pin. No egos anywhere, just women collaborating to do something that might prod somebody with a stick, So we're now trying to sell that work to the Vatican, and we're going to show it. We're going to show it in Rome in February, and maybe other places along the way, but Rome in February. So to come back to collectives and what we thought we might do today, we do have some thoughts, but I'll hand over to Deirdre to introduce herself.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to time myself, otherwise I'll waffle for too long. Firstly, thanks, Breda and everyone, for that initial presentation. It reminded me of what I wasn't going to say, so I'm going to bring that in now and probably exceed my time limit. I fled Ireland. I was at art school in Galway in what is now, I can't remember the acronym, it used to be GMIT. And I fled, I left there in 1976, started there in 74, and I can remember taking a bus in solidarity with those doing the sit-in in NCAD, because we were all protesting the same issues at the time, and that transition from the old style education system to the sort of more contemporary art. And I suppose I say that because I went to London, I went to London in 76 to continue my education at St. Martin's. And it coincided with punk, which was the beginnings of DIY culture and artists taking control for themselves of what it was they could do and say within the public sphere. And while I was still picking my jaw up from the floor because I was so shocked by it, it had a huge impact on me. This was a time when London was full of bombs. It was not a comfortable place to be, being Irish. It was, after I left college, I felt very isolated in trying to address my own history and experience as an artist in London at the time. And I was knocking around with a big group of London Irish artists and musicians and writers. But there were no other visual artists. So at the time, I began to try and reach out to Irish visual artists in London. And I came across the Irish Women Artists Group in London, IAWA, which was founded by Anne Tallentyre. And I'm still not sure, in my brief conversation with Breda, which came first, the London one or the Irish one. But Anne Tallentyre and a group of others in London put on 2 exhibitions called Prism 1 and 2. And whoops, I've exceeded my time. It was really important for me to have that space to show with other Irish artists and to identify as Irish in that highly contested context. That led to the formation of another group of Irish artists in London called Livia, and I can thank Kate O'Shea for making me dig out this history. And
it's funny that you're looking at me to thank Kate O'Shea.
Well, because I know you've worked with her. But to dig out that history and make sure it's included within the IAWA archives and those lost, or what could have otherwise been lost, I think. It's interesting because Anne Tallentyre herself didn't even realise that the project that Kate is doing around artist-led archives was in train at the time. And she has now added to the material that I put in there. So I'll cut to the chase. I came back to Ireland in '91 when I had a child and landed in the middle of the country, extremely isolated. No contacts in Ireland because that didn't happen back then. You didn't have the same fluidity of travel. So I set up the North Clare Artists Group as a way of surviving. Out of that group came a small group of 4 artists, myself, Fiona Woods, Veronica Nicholson, and Joan O'Hanrahan. And we were asked by the North Clare Historical Society, would we be interested in doing a temple bar on the courthouse, the old courthouse in Ennisdiamond. And that began the Courthouse Studios and Gallery in Ennisdiamond. Out of that group came the Ground Up Artist Collective, and I can see Pauline is here, which is still in, I think the Ground Up Artist Collective is still going. And out of that experience, I suppose I established the XPO as a different kind of space in a former post office in rural North Clare. And the XPO was a space for different communities to come together and not all become best friends, but to learn off one another, to exchange with one another. And through that came a host of other collaborations with the Law Association of Ireland. This is the XPO Mapping Group, which is an extraordinary group, still going. I'm still a very peripheral member now. There was, the next slide, the Law Association of Ireland that I've been collaborating and working with. And again, it's very informal, but we've been working together since 2015, making potato plants as a way of looking at what forms of knowledge are considered important and relevant today. And there's all sorts of layers with that project that I'm not going to go into now. But that project in turn made me think about the whole question of where our food comes from, farming, and thinking about art as a critical space to help us see things differently. So collective action and archival processes really have been central to my way of thinking over the past 40 years now, actually. It's scary when it goes into 40 as opposed to 30 years.
Thanks so much to Helena for inviting me here. And yeah, I just really thoroughly enjoyed that conversation. I suppose my kind of perspective. Oh, actually, could I have? Yeah. I suppose, yeah. The reason I'm here, I guess, is to kind of draw on my perspective in general on collectives. Not so much art collectives specifically, but more, again, that kind of yearning that a lot of us have as, like since a child or a teenager, to be part of something that you just inherently feel something's wrong, even if you haven't been educated that way, or you're brought up in a way like that you're in an ideal home and everything, and you should be thankful for everything, but you yet have that yearning. So my life basically has been going from one collective to another, seeking out another, from everything from joining the SWM as a teenager and the Anti-Nazi League, right through to, in my mid-40s, joining an urban activist, anarchist and autonomous group in Athens, and as well as setting up my own collectives as well. And again, it would be based on shared sets of values of anti-capitalist, anti-neoliberalist from a feminist perspective. But what I found over time and time again, that these would inevitably dissolve, or I've actually even left groups I've formed myself due to toxic patriarchal kind of behaviours or codes of behaviours, or that were very kind of frustratingly invisible in that within the collectives I was part of, and this is every single collective I was part of, there were these things that were never acknowledged, kind of the power dynamics that went on, and they would be left to fester. So then everything would become kind of fragmented, and people would eventually leave. And a lot of the collectives seem to kind of borrow from that kind of Marxist tradition of organising as well, which was really male-centred. So basically, I kind of gave up on everything till I met at a conference in Athens. I met this amazing woman. We were both in our early 50s at the time, or no, late 40s, early 50s. And we'd come out of, we were both talking at a conference in Athens, and we'd signed up to be editors for the conference. Basically, anyway, we had this meeting with 3 of the anarchists within the group who were already editors. And we came out and just looked at each other, and I won't say what we said, because it might be offensive, and we bonded straight away. And then we set about for the next 2 years organising. We created an organisation called the Radical Institute that was literally based on our shared experiences of collectives. So she was from Athens, and she was part of various feminist anarchist collectives as well. So what we basically, I mean, I suppose I always find this so difficult to explain. I don't know why. So I've kind of written it down for clarity. Because we draw from so many, again, we've both had lifetimes of, both came from political theory, cultural theory, feminism, social ecology, blah, blah, blah. So we had kind of already backgrounds within that kind of underpinned or kind of informed our take on how collectives should be, or what was actually kind of going wrong. So basically, the Radical Institute became, I guess, a research organisation, but that was also very practice-based. We use kind of creative practice, basically art practice, to kind of explore and cultivate organisational processes and practices that can make visible, basically, what's going on in the room. So basically, to make visible the reproduction of what are otherwise invisible oppressions and hierarchies in groups, especially those based in gender, we found. And even when I talk about kind of patriarchal modes of behaviour within the power dynamics, we found it really useful actually to go beyond gender, and to actually fixate on patriarchal modes of behaviour, attitudes, for a number of reasons, because I don't need to kind of explain that right now. And again, what kind of underpinned everything that we were looking into is our own, again, to go back to that kind of need that we carried in our teenage years. And then I suppose when I discovered Mary Bookchin's work in social ecology, it really kind of, everything kind of came together for me, because it was everything underpinning it. It was based on this sort of interconnectedness between the self, community and nature, and that everything that we kind of devise and every process had to be understood within that kind of with that balance basically between those three, between your own relationship with the community. So basically it was that you can't have autonomy unless your community has autonomy also. So basically it was based on that, and now I do trainings and workshops, and I mentor mainly socially engaged political artists around how to kind of embed these structures, self-organisational structures within their collaborative work and within collectives in general as well. So and maybe through the conversation it'll become clearer. So we were going to, we met for the first time on Zoom yesterday, and I think we could have talked for hours and hours and hours. So we kind of agreed to try and divide our conversation between three categories, really three kind of topics. Do you have them there?
I have them here.
Yeah. So the first thing we were going to, we thought might be interesting to kind of explore within the idea of collectives, and again, the idea of building kind of resilience within collectives was, I think you came up with this, Catherine, it was structure versus anarchy.
I did, yeah. You have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
I suppose I've always been conflicted between the need for structure to make things work efficiently and the fact that I can't actually obey traffic lights when I'm walking. I do when I'm driving, but I can't wait for the lights. I just have to go when I want to go, and I don't join. I never joined a political party because I wouldn't take a whip on anything, no matter how left-wing it was even. I just couldn't do it, you know. And then actually, Colin, would you mind if we went back a couple of slides to that piece, the problematic piece of text? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I was asked to give a talk about Patricia Hearn, who's one of the Kylocks, a couple of years ago, and she's here. And I started in a hurry. I jotted down these things that pertained when Patricia was a member of WAAG and was having her first big, groundbreaking exhibition of art by a woman, but not just any old art, a painting exhibition. And an exhibition that was about domestic issues. And at the time, I think that's relevant because, in a way, all the conflicts that Patricia had to deal with were part of WAAG, and I suppose they symbolise the various conflicts that arise in every collective, I think. So Patricia had, she was told by a male tutor she couldn't use yellow because just don't use yellow. It's just rule of DIADT in those days. So she used yellow in everything. It's the central colour in all her work. And when they had her solo show at IMA, they painted the walls yellow just to make the point even stronger. They said she couldn't be figurative because the art world was moving away from figurative art at the time that she was going to art college. She couldn't be figurative because insofar as she was allowed to be figurative, or there was figuration in Ireland, critics would dismiss her as trying to look like Paddy Graham because she was an expressionist painter using figuration. She couldn't be a painter because the feminists said that paint belonged to the patriarchy, so find some other form of expression. She couldn't paint the domestic sphere because feminists didn't like it and said, that's old hat now, we've moved on, we want to show the world we're out there and not stuck at the kitchen sink. But the kitchen sink is where all the problems often start, okay? She couldn't reveal the hardships of domesticity. This is the same point really, because it isn't the same point, because housewives around Ireland felt put down if she said, domesticity isn't all it's cracked up to be. They had this careful facade, they needed to keep it going. Then of course she had to try to find a studio with small children and no childcare. We've been through all this. She had to paint at home, in the kitchen with children buzzing around her. She had to paint at top speed before rushing off to collect children from school. She had no chance of a full-time job in teaching, because there were none for women in those days. She couldn't have a pint after a hard-working day, because they didn't serve women pints in Irish pubs. In fact, you couldn't go to a loo in an Irish pub without the money to get past the spend a penny problem. What else did I have there? It doesn't really matter. And then there was the WAAG workshops and the need to work out of their places. So I think all collectives have smatterings of all of these different tensions within them. So if you're trying to create a structure, if the structure is loose enough to encompass all the different problems, then it ceases to have much of a structure. You might as well not have it. And the opposition might seem to be anarchy. And I was lucky enough to be at a presentation 2 days ago, given by two people who I'm glad to say have come all the way down from Dublin, to which they had come all the way from Brisbane in Australia, who talked about their project in a place called Maruka, which it seemed to me was anarchy written big. Because, you can correct me, of course, Elizabeth and Kevin, and there will be time, I'm sure, in the Q&A for you to correct everything I'm saying. But the model that they described was a model where you create an art project that is looking at the community all around it, that is drawing the community in, that is sustained by volunteers brought in from the community, that is funded, apart from the initial funding that they got from their Arts Council to start off the project, seemed to be funded by money that people put in their donation box with one hand and took out with the other because they needed it for something. But it was all built on trust. And, can you have a collective without too much structure to be quite anarchic? I think if you have enough trust, you can do it, and that's not going to last forever. And we know it's not. It's just human nature, it won't last forever. They've made it last for 5 years. The Kylocks are going 5 years as well, actually. So maybe there's something there. We're non-hierarchical. I think that's important. Although, again, even managing a talk like ours now, we particularly don't have a chair keeping an eye on us, or timing us or anything else. So
We're running out.
Yeah, I'm running out of time now. So, it may be Deirdre or Eve, whichever of you would like to speak next.
Well, I guess just kind of in response to, I'd probably come from the opposite sort of perspective as well. Again, just drawing from my own experience. And I suppose when it comes to the idea of, it's not either or, but I guess it's a balance between the two, as you said. But I really kind of argue for that there has to be an underlying agreed structure, basically, with agreed codes of behaviour, and like a framework, basically, of kind of expression of values, and I think that is absolutely paramount. And particularly if I joined a collective and these things weren't even being considered, I'd run a mile now. And again, that's down from experience. I find that those who tend to think that this sort of, preparatory kind of organisational processes for collectives is a waste of time, tend to be the ones that carry the most entitlement and don't actually see the need for it, because they probably don't have a need for it, So it's usually the people like myself or others who have been who kind of understand the different sort of, and fluid sort of power dynamics that can go on within collectives. And again, as I mentioned before, how toxic these can become if there isn't any kind of platform or any way of expressing them without getting into conflict. So, and again, just as part of our research, we went to ulix.org in Barcelona, our social Buddhist group, who do amazing trainings on sustainable activism and transformative collaboration. So they basically, have like so many different techniques, methods, whatever, that we take into our practice now within our work. But even just to demonstrate how, so I would imagine that most collectives come together because of a set of shared values, let's say. And then I've learned over the years that, actually, it's not how we share values, it's how we enact those values, and usually that's the clash. So if we go on to the photograph, sorry, Colin, of just, it's the only, that one. So I'm part now of Cork Community Land Trust. We're trying to set up the first land trust community land trust in Ireland. And we've been doing these, we've been incorporating my research into what we're calling community building, just loosely calling community building at the moment. But it's really fascinating then to see these things at work. So, for example, we invited different people from a particular kind of geographical location. And again, people divided into different groups. We divided people into groups according to kind of, again, what could be loosely seen as kind of shared sets of values. And then just ask them kind of the first thing was that they all had to, within their smaller groups, they had to kind of agree on what their priority, just say the top 3 values, the top 3 needs, or whatever. And when you kind of break it down, like the discussions could have gone on all day, and we're talking about something as not basic, but like worried about the environment, or something as kind of basic as that. But within the whole kind of spectrum of having that as a value, in order to, like, you have some who enact it by they just recycle, and that goes all the way to an activist gluing themselves onto a main road, so it really, the kind of complexity, so we really work towards trying to kind of manage, or not manage, but kind of explore the complexity of being in collectives and those sort of shifting power dynamics, and how we then, as how we might kind of go forward with that. And again, it can be kind of boiled down to a very kind of simple practice of how you align your individual needs with the needs of the collective, basically. And it's that kind of understanding that just because that we all come with these assumptions and expectations when we join a collective, basically, and then we kind of assume that we kind of share these the same issues, etc. But it's only through kind of these sort of reflective processes that we can understand that our particular needs might not be met when you can compare them to kind of the needs of the collective. So we kind of did these workshops, and what was really surprising was how very kind of unexpected kind of alliances were made, or when we kind of compare, we knew there would be some sort of kind of conflictual differences there as well, but we kind of embraced that as ways of learning. And with this particular group, there was some people who were really concerned about the kind of drug use in the neighbourhood, and then they were concerned about the school kids, safety issues and all that. But when we broke it down, we put everything on the wall after workshopping it. We could see that ways of kind of addressing particular needs with the school children around health and safety matched with the drug users, and so again it kind of brought that kind of understanding of actually this could be seen as a kind of a collective need that, not in their structure.
I'm going to talk about one project because I think it encompasses what both of you are talking about. When I moved back to Ireland, I moved to Clare, and I moved to North Clare, and it was the time of construction of the Interpretive Centre in Mullaghmore, which was hugely divisive in that particular place. And I suppose I got an education in kind of moving from a kind of perspective on land and landscape as a kind of aesthetic object to thinking about it as the product of a very complicated set of relationships between farming and place and the changes that are undergoing in that particular place as it shifts from food production to consumption, whether it's consumption through tourism or whatever. And I reopened the post office as XPO, and I think my project application to the Arts Council said something like, that it would be a space for a kind of cultural exchange point for different communities, for different publics in the area. So from the get-go, there was an acknowledgement of difference. And I didn't set it up as a collective or as any kind of collaborative process. I set it up as a space. And people could bring their own ideas and projects to that space. And different groups did come out of it, like the mapping group that you saw in the slide. But it was a space for people to bring their own particular interests into play. And I got funding to run it for 6 months. All sorts of really interesting projects came out of it. But I made it really clear from the very beginning, because I think, Breda, you mentioned the problem of 5-year burnout, or the 5-year limit. There should be a 5-year limit. I actually think it should be 3 years limit on running any organisation. So I was really, my own experience in other organisations really confirmed for me the need for whatever structure might remain after I stopped running that space had to be manageable by these very diverse groups of people. And how do we go about doing that? So I kind of fell into it through, I invited an artist called Jay Ko, who's a Singaporean Chinese, actually, artist, who happened to be in Ireland at the time. And he was really fluent in socially engaged practice. And he did several visitors, and he visits to the project. And it was really interesting because he was the real idiosyncratic outsider coming in. And he was able to name the unnamed, the unmentionable, all the things that might get in the way of people communicating or whatever. Jay was able to do that. And so he posed the question continuously over the 4 visits that he did in a 7-month period about how was the future of the space going to be ensured. And so through that extended process and then a final meeting, it became really clear that there was a healthy appetite for continuing the project, absolutely. I couldn't continue it. I wasn't going to run it because I'm a megalomaniac, and I would have gotten in the way of any kind of relationships developing that were remotely healthy. A megalomaniac might be a little bit extreme, but the structure that evolved through these various meetings was that there should be a rotating 3-year team leadership. We didn't even use the word committee because it's such a powerful term, especially in rural places. and the people who were invested, people put their hands up. There were different clubs, an organised group using the space. So they were all represented in the team. But it was agreed to keep the workload as light as possible. So you had a recording of what was discussed and what were the actions, and that was it. There was a refusal to apply, it's gas hearing Catherine describe your project. It was an absolute refusal to apply for public funding, for anything, because of the burden of administration and everything that comes with it. €2 goes in the box. Everybody who uses the space puts €2 in the box. The space is kind of still running. It's petering out. I'd be surprised if it goes on another year. But it opened in 2007 and it was really healthily used up until COVID. COVID kind of broke it, as it did so many organisations. But I think there's something in keeping structures light, keeping a turnover of people. Of course, there's always going to be conflicts. But I sent you both on a paper that I turn to every time I hit conflicts in organisations. It's by Jan Weerwoord, who's a Dutch theorist, and it's called If Things Are Not Quickly to Go Pear-Shaped. If things are not quickly, sorry, I'm even giving it the way. If things are not quickly to go pear-shaped, I can send it to Helena if you want a copy, because this is my touchstone. But one of his, it's a manifesto, it's like points, but he talks about the need for pragmatism helps protect basic operative structures from becoming charged with psychological projections. Honestly, this is gold. It's really just so good. Anyway.
It's that notion that nothing focuses your mind like hanging, isn't it? You know, it cuts through all this, the psychological stuff that's waiting to well up, but if you don't have time for it and you just go for it. In a way, our project was a bit like that too. We had no money. It wasn't that we decided not to apply for money. We actually did, but we were hopeless. As a collective, it's much more difficult anyway to get money. And also, the project we were doing to the people we applied to sounded so harebrained that they didn't want anything to do with it. And the minute we've done it, they're all ready to support it backwards. But anyway, that's beside the point.
We've kind of crossed over to our second point, haven't we? Just as well, really, because we've totally gone over our time. Did you want to add to that? Sorry.
Well, the second, exactly, we had was about how collaborations can kind of evolve. We were talking about the difference between collaborations and collectives, weren't we, yesterday? It was something you had said, Catherine, that something that can, like the collaboration is the starting point.
And it often grows into a collective. Although in fact, with the Kylux, it was exactly the other way around.
I was going to say.
But I think it began, we called it a collective from the beginning, but I think it was meant to be a collaboration. Helen Comerford, who's no longer with us, sadly, and was an important figure towards the founding of WAAG back in the 1980s. Helen had gone to Cyprus years ago and worked in a place in Cyprus where they had 8 residencies. And so she thought she'd get 8 people together and see if we could all go together to Cyprus and make artwork. And then COVID happened. And instead of going to Cyprus, because we couldn't travel, we went to the Ballinglen Art Foundation. But somewhere between the initial, we'll go to Cyprus and we'll make art and we'll show it at the end of our month there or something, we became a collective. And I drove to Mayo thinking, what's the difference between a collective and a collaborative? And, you know, what are we doing here? But it seemed as if we were then, and I'm a curator rather than an artist, what I found myself doing with my fellow Kylux was trying to find ways of being 8 completely different people with very, very, very different practices. We didn't know each other, all of us, before we started. We didn't particularly like each other's work, I would say, you know, but we did have shared values, and we did have a little bit of a dream, you know, so we decided to pitch in. And so now we curate and have exhibitions that have a sort of umbrella that everybody can sneak in under, but allows them all to be totally different. That's the first thing. And then the second thing, coming back to what we're meant to be talking about, well, not necessarily the difference between cooperation and collaboratives, but
how one can even be nurtured into another.
yeah, exactly, is that we all change, you know. I would say all of it, and this is only a small group, contained group, so, you know, you could do a focus study on 8 people staying together, working together for 8 years, and you might learn things out of it. I've learned a few things, which is that we actually all got better at working with each other, better rather than worse, which in the beginning I thought we'll last a year and then we'll eat each other, but in fact now we are all getting better. And I recently spoke to the eldest person, who's 87, Barbara Freeman, in Belfast, who's about to have a big retrospective, and I was asking her about her past life. She collaborated all her life with musicians, and she said she loved collaborations because they always took her somewhere else. And it is that openness to being somewhere else, I think, that is what collaboration is about. And if you can make that work within a collective as well, then you're singing, you know.
No, go on, please.
No, I was just going to say, in relation to what you just described, I remember talking to you after you'd gone to Ballinglem, and the experience of actually being in one place for the 2 weeks, I think that was crucially important.
Yes, it
That
was a big
kind
help,
of intimate time to actually get to know each other properly, to go past the initial whatever niggles or frictions might arise, and go through that and properly connect.
Yeah, and again, I totally agree with what you're saying, but also I think because sometimes collectives or people are brought together for very specific projects or particular reasons,
Absolutely.
and you don't have that kind of natural sort of social connection with them. And with the Cork Community Land Trust, again, just because I was just really, really haunted and marked by architects, just having worked in, had 3 years in a school of architecture and being the only non-architect there, I was just very, damaged, I would say. And so now I was starting a collective, that was going to be really long-term, with 3 architects. So I asked to introduce that, if we could, even before we started, to introduce the reflective process.
Yeah.
You know, so, but I really believe that, that if it doesn't happen naturally, but even if it does, you have to kind of take the time to create that space where you get to have these kind of conversations. So the way we did it is, again, really simple. It was like I had about 4 or 5 questions, and we had a reflective workshop, and it was only all about what our personal aims were. We shared our personal aims, our personal objectives, our motivations, expectations, or whatever. And then we do that every 6 months, and it's 3.5 years in now, and it's the same questions we ask, we repeat.
Okay.
But we always call for it when it's like there's an obvious strain in the relationships, because it's an incredibly stressful thing we've taken on ourselves. And there's loads of imbalances in work, and there's just a lot of kind of issues that come with it. But these sessions have just been invaluable. I'd say we wouldn't have lasted a year without them. because it really gives, because you're creating a different space for it, it really gives you an opportunity to kind of air your frustrations to each other, but not in a personal way. You're not, you know, it's, again, you're talking about kind of the failure in a system or something. So it's not, oh, I do much more work than you, and, you know, it's like the way things have turned out now. This has happened, what are we going to do about this? How do we kind of, you know, fix that imbalance? But yeah, anyway, so because collaborations can be with friends, strangers, whatever, but I think it's, yeah, really important to just have that kind of ongoing kind of reflective process to make time and space for that.
Yeah, I think that's
again,
the
it's around
key.
the idea of care and nurture, that you give yourselves that time to, you know, to be able to do that for yourselves and each other as well.
But if I can ask a question about this, we decided to get an external evaluator to look at us and our practice and see how we were going. Now, as it happens, for reasons to do with that person, and we asked a young man actually to look at us old ladies. Unfortunately for him, he only went so far with that research, and then for reasons of his own he had to drop out. So we never saw the end of it. But we did have conversations with him, and they were extremely useful and helpful. But you know, you're doing it for yourselves. You don't bring somebody in from outside.
No,
do
again,
you?
it's part of that kind of self-organizational strategy.
Yeah, I think that's great.
It's called a group container, so it's trying to hold it within the group.
Yeah.
So we're all jointly responsible for it. And again, even just going back to maybe, like, we had one again recently, and we're due one next week as well. But, you know, I noticed, because I'm the one who facilitates the workshops, that the questions are the things that, again, they express our individual needs, and there's loads of them that we've carried over the last 3 years that have not been met, you know. So again, but it gives space for that conversation. Is this worth it, you know?
Sure.
Or are we going to, like, spend another 3 years on this and we're not personally getting what we expected to get out of it from it, you know? So really, yeah, it's really good just to keep revisiting even the same questions for yourself over and over.
I think, sorry, Tricia.
Just to carry on this talk, the kind of that is an example. I mean, I can't see an end to it, to be honest with you, because we are so supportive of each other. If one of our members died, and we still grieve, still an empty chair there, but it's nearly like we don't always agree. Loads of times we don't agree, and we have had one person left because she wasn't, her work wasn't selling. She made her living from selling work, and we don't do that. But it doesn't stop us painting or drawing or making houses, even, you know. We just encourage each other. We know we will get it right.
I think there's a really important, how am I going to say this? I think a really important space for within collaborations. No, space isn't the right word. It's really important in some ways to openly disappoint your fellow collaborators. There it is, it's out there now. Because, you know, the kind of hierarchies that come with people feeling very sure and certain of their knowledge and how projects should evolve, or how collaboration should evolve. Open disappointment is a really useful strategy, and I learned it the hard way when it wasn't an intentional open disappointment, but when at the XPO, and it was a really important lesson for me when I stepped up at a parish meeting that was taking place in the space and made a point that everybody was unhappy with. And I remember somebody turning around to me afterwards. I won't go into the whole thing because it'd take too long, but somebody came up to me afterwards and said, how can someone so smart be so stupid? And they were absolutely right, because we're not all smart in the one sphere. You know, we have different kinds of intelligence. And in a way, in a very painful way for me, what that opened up was a space for what I didn't know to be acknowledged, because up until then I was wearing a halo, and that's really unhealthy. And for other people to come forward and to take on the role. Yeah. Sorry, we're just going over our time.
We are. But are you finished your point, though, dear?
I think I have, yeah. If I hadn't, I've forgotten it.
It was about your feet of clay.
The feet of clay, yeah, exactly. It's about showing your feet of clay. And that's really important.
But you have to be comfortable to be, you have to have created.
It's that trust in each other then.
We forgot to mention Joan Fowler.
Yeah, I wondered about.
And I think this is the problem with the
Thanks.
forgetting, like I've always got to mention.
Would have been a very important organiser and brain and kind of convener of Irish women's art, and brought really good people into discussions and seminars and invited people, and again used her position as an academic in an institution to write from and then circle as well. So I just wanted to say that. I think Elisa has a question.
Hello everyone. Just a point about the collectives in general. I suppose, I think from my opinion, an important point is that a success of a collective is not always the longevity of the collective.
Indeed.
Sometimes we confuse these things. Like WAAG, for example, had a lifespan, but in that time they actually achieved what they wanted to achieve, which was visibility, and they achieved quite well. And that probably also is relevant to other collectives. Sometimes the fact that they last. I'm not saying it's good if something lasts longer, but it's not like inherent in the quality of a collective, a long-term relation. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But especially if it's an informal group of people coming together with a specific goal or out of specific disappointment, it might be just like a set of time, and just important to recognize that whenever we're talking about those. So it's not a question.
Yeah, I think we can probably all attest to either being part of a collective or knowing of collectives or even partnerships or collaborations that served a specific purpose or were to achieve an aim, whether that was about visibility or space or just a shared interest and activism or otherwise. And then maybe once you get to a certain point, it becomes, it's time to move on. And also people change. So I think that's the thing about collectives.
But I think as well it's really important that then again to always revisit the main aims, objectives, your motivation for doing it. Because I agree, far too often they're just left, there's nobody left basically, or they just fizzle out or they become something else.
That's interesting about your collective or the Land Trust, Steve, is that you've already decided at the beginning that to achieve your aims, it's long term. It's going to take time, and that therefore you have to build in those elements within the project to ensure that you have that reflection, because you know that it could end without that kind of reflection
it's
process.
more to do with that it's not serving a purpose for me anymore, or something has changed that actually is completely against whatever my belief system. So yeah, it's to kind of constantly revisit these things to make sure, and again the assumptions that we're constantly making about each other, that just because I'm pissed off with this doesn't mean that, you know, and also then to kind of implement changes, which is so important, to keep changing it up. Just because we've put a system in place doesn't mean it's going to work forever, and it might work for a while and then it's not. So then, yeah, other things have to be suggested. But it's working for us because it never becomes personal, you know.
Could I just say something in extension of that really as well, and that is, while we started off, and I think a collaborative rather than a collective, we very quickly did write down a couple of stated a vision and some ambitions that we had, which were mainly to make work around being reflecting older women feminists, and commenting on, you know, how being older affected what we did health-wise, and also maybe where we are in the society now and so on. And that's changing all the time. But a big challenge that was built into that, obviously, was longevity, not the longevity of the collective, our longevity, you know, that we might be popping off or losing our minds or, you know, losing our health in various ways, not be able to do the things that we did. And we decided from the beginning we would try to accommodate that and make that part of what we did. Now, we're doing that to greater or lesser degrees of success at the moment. So one of our colleagues dropped out and we invited somebody in her place and kept the number at 8. But then another one, as Patricia mentioned, Helen died last year. We are in the process of inviting somebody to come in to take her place. But, you know, I'm not sure how this will pan out as the rest of us all hit a point where we just, there's a critical mass. So.
She's the criteria.
That's the anarchic bit, really. We don't have a job description, but the person has to be over 70, okay? And that's and an artist, and I suppose it has to be a woman. So there are 3 things, yeah.
That was something I was going to ask across collectives. How do you decide who's in and who's out? Like you were saying earlier about some men wanting to join, and like you want to keep it at 8, but has someone decided, right, we're not going to 9 or we're not going to 10, and like we're not jumping to 6? So it's just across collectives who decide.
Decide who goes out.
Yeah. But say even in Deirdre, XPO, and I assume the land trust probably is the community. So
yeah, like basically we're literally holding space till the membership then takes over the land trust. Yeah.
It's just an interesting.
So we just have to hang on in there till that.
From back in that day to now, who decides who's in the collective? Is it geographical boundaries, age? Is it a committee decision? I was trying to remember the words you used about
The team leadership.
Yeah.
From the thing that I've observed is the thing that keeps collectives going is desire. Collaborations and collectives.
And consequently, often our conversations heat up, and we bear ourselves because we say all about your body and challenges that you have, you didn't have when you were young. When I was young, I would have never dreamt I'd be going into a group like this, and now I know how important it is to us.
Mm.
Forward to is we Zoom. We don't see each other all the time, which is probably a good idea. And so we Zoom once a week. So once a week seems like twice a week. We Zoom, and then we meet up on occasions. Maybe go away on the weekend.
Yeah, I'd just like to remark on the amount of collectives that there are nowadays. You know, in Antrim we have, you know, a member from the Area Collective in the audience here as well, and just to remark on that, like, and I don't know what I want to say, but it's more like, just to make a point really, but it's really about how society has changed and that the need for collective or collaborative work has become so obvious, with the way society has changed. Like we just, when WAAG was founded, it was just like out of the traps, because you had to do it, kind of thing. But maybe you would address that thing, how society has changed and the amount of regulation and everything that there is, in terms of setting up a collective and everything. But there seems to be, in all art now, I've just come back from Biennale in Budapest, and half of the artists showing their work in groups are collaborative.
I just wanted to say that I first, in Holland, saw two women artists who made a painting together. That was revolutionary. Like they were painting the same painting together. And it's against the image of the artist in the studio, all alone, a kind of a concept that often has a beard. And, it's just a silly idea, and that was broken and challenged by collaboration, like Louise Walsh and myself, Alice and Louise. It was just, we're going to do it, it's kind of like us, the work. And Louise and I kept saying, it's not what you like or I like, it's what the work needs. Yeah. And that was very liberating.
So does anyone want to address Alice's point in terms of the need, societal need now? That maybe is it more than it was, or has it just changed its form?
I think it's really scary to put your head up over the parapet alone now. Do I think that I've experienced being an artist as we've been training students to be professional, to have this skill, to have that skill. It's almost impossible to format yourself with all the layers and relevancies and talents and expertise and learning and critical knowledge and technical knowledge. I think it's really important to share the burden of that, but also expand your capacity. And I've been lucky to get incredible help at different points in time. Sinead Keogh is here. They've helped a lot of older female artists in incredible ways, and there's just so much need for us to band together. I think this current and ongoing debacle in our kind of culture and our technical culture is devastating and kind of paralysing, and we need, I've been out trying to gather myself for a few years, but you really need a bit of a village behind you, but not behind you, beside you, I think. Not under you, but beside you, and moving in formations that shift and kind of are dynamic. I don't know that I've been able to do it, but I see other people doing it really well, and we are necessary to each other, and we are necessary to each other's survival more than ever. And to be encompassing of all of our differences is a very radical challenge for all of us, I think, politically and in terms of compassion as well.
I think that's the thing that's been, I think, a thread throughout the day's conversation, is that these collectives and collaborations have been like survival strategies. Yeah. And I think that the conditions have changed and have shifted, and opportunities have changed and shifted, and the landscape has changed and shifted, but those kind of basic survival strategies, that need for solidarity and understanding and different skill sets, are still fundamental, and the landscape has changed drastically, and although there is a wider infrastructure now, well, it's not so centralised, but funding has been cut dramatically, and the amount of art students that are coming out of college every year has massively risen, and just the amount of opportunities that are available for people, and the kind of landscape that people are emerging into.
Completely telescoped in.
Yeah. And so therefore, there's a lot of empty words, I think, spoken about care and strategies of care, and particularly by institutions in ways that are often not backed up by practice, and that's why I think what Eve is talking about is so crucial, the fact that there needs to be a particular, when it's a survival strategy, in order for that survival strategy to be effective, there needs to be a way to ensure the survival of the survival strategy.
Yeah.
I just talked about myself.
very, very young. And I was delighted to be married, and I had a big wedding, and I had my children, and it was all wonderful. And then I woke up one day, realised what I'm doing. And I was always drawing as a child, never thought to go to art college, able to go. And I'm just saying this as something that I feel really strong. My husband loved me very much because I did all he wanted me to do. And so I decided to go to night classes and wrap minds, school of art, arts, design. And I started to take it seriously. And instead of being around, there would be a space in the sitting room with my paints and not wanted to talk. And it got worse and worse, and finally got divorced. And I find this, I often, when I was teaching in art school, I wanted to give people who are coming in, married people, to give them a badge. Art is bad for your marriage. Because I couldn't count the number of women. They broke up because their work was so important. I don't have any feedback.
Yeah, I suppose I just wanted to make a point when you were talking about, archive and legacy, but like legacy can happen, I think, in lots of different ways. And I was really lucky to be a student of Pauline and Louise and Alana. And I think, the legacy they brought down to us was kind of a legacy of care, of, solidarity, generosity, and of always challenging things, pushing us to challenge things. And, we have brought that, a whole generation of artists that, we're lucky enough to have them as tutors, brought that with us. And as well, kind of, I think, for us then as artists to kind of pass that on, to other artists that we work with, or, younger artists coming up again, like, so I think legacy, you have your physical legacy and an archive, but the legacy really is like, all the people that you have shown generosity and, given to us over the years.
Well, thank you.